Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with beans and greens tartine. That's right, we're combining bacony beans with garlicky greens to make what the French might call a tartine, which is just a fancy name for an open-faced sandwich. And this, my friends, is definitely something you want to open your face for. Not only because it's delicious and beautiful, but these ingredients are guaranteed to bring you good luck in the new year. And I will explain that more later. But for now, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our toast. And what I have here are 2 nice thick slices of French bread that I'm going to place down on this foil-lined baking sheet, at which point we will fairly generously drizzle these with olive oil. And we'll definitely do both sides. And sure, if you wanted to, you could use melted butter instead. I mean, this does have a French name, so that would be appropriate. But with this particular array of ingredients, I just thought the olive oil would work better. And then what we'll do once that's set is go ahead and pop this into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 20 minutes or so, or until our bread starts to turn a light golden brown, and our surface and edges start to get crispy, which if we drag our tongs across it will sound like this. And if one side's a little more golden than the other, we'll go ahead and place that side down, and that's it. We'll simply reserve that until needed, and we can move on to prep our greens. And pretty much any kind of dark leafy green is going to work here. And here I decided to go with some Swiss chard. And to prep, we will simply tear the leafy parts off the stems. And yes, there's lots of recipes where we would just slice through the stems and use it. But for these, I wanted pure leaf. Speaking of which, once that's prepped, we can leave for the stove, where we have a pot of boiling lightly salted water. And what we'll do is toss our greens in, and we'll go ahead and poke those down below the surface. And as soon as we do that, we will want to quickly grab a bowl of cold water, since we're only going to cook these for about 2 minutes total, at which point we'll transfer them into that cold water to stop the cooking process. And no, it does not have to be ice water. As I like to say, save your ice for your drinks. But anyway, like I said, we're going to cook those for about 2 minutes, right? Basically just to soften and wilt those leaves, at which point we'll transfer that into our bowl of cold water. And once that's been accomplished and those greens have cooled down a little, we will drain those very well, and we will squeeze out as much water as possible before transferring those to a cutting board, where we're going to give them a rough chop, which by the way is optional. And this will work if you don't do that. But I find giving these a little bit of a chop first makes it easier to put on top of our toast. But before that happens, we have things to do. Like head back to the stove, where we're going to add a couple cloves of finely minced garlic into some olive oil in a skillet set over medium heat, and we will just sizzle that garlic in that oil for about 20 seconds or so. Okay, we don't want this stuff to start to color, but we do want to take off the raw edge and infuse that oil with that garlicky goodness. And once we feel like that's happened, we'll go ahead and toss in our greens, and we will stir that all together. And that's it. Once we feel like everything's been evenly combined, we can go ahead and turn off the heat, and we can finish this up with the rest of the ingredients, which will include some freshly grated lemon zest. Oh, and we'll also be using some of the juice, but not quite yet. And then we'll also want to toss in some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a very generous pinch of salt. And if we're in the mood for it, a few shakes of cayenne. And yes, I'm almost always in the mood for it. And once we have everything stirred together, we will let this cool and simply reserve it until needed. And if we're making this ahead, you could pop that in the fridge. But either way, once that's set, we can move on to our last component, which is our bacony bean spread, which we will begin by adding 2 strips of cut up bacon to this dry saucepan set over medium heat, and we will cook that bacon stirring occasionally until most, if not all, of that fat is rendered out, and we have some beautifully brown crispy bits. And once we get to that point, we will turn off the heat, and we'll remove that bacon to a bowl with a slotted spoon, and we'll set that aside until needed. And then depending on how fatty your bacon was, we might need to spoon out or soak up some of the fat from the pan. All right, we want to leave a generous tablespoon for the next step, but if you have more than that, you can go ahead and take some out. And then what we're going to do is put our heat back on to medium-high, and we'll toss in some sliced green onion, or regular onion, or shallot, or anything in that family. And then we'll cook those stirring for just about a minute. All right, not too long. We just want them to soften up a touch. And once that's happened, we'll stop and add a little bit of cumin, plus a nice big pinch of dry oregano, preferably Mexican oregano, but anything will do. And we'll also toss in a nice big pinch of salt, and we'll stir all that together. At which point we'll transfer in 1 can of drained and rinsed pinto beans, or the beans of your choice. All right, so use what you want. I mean, you are, after all, the grooms of your legumes. But considering the other ingredients I'm going to pair these with, I think the pinto beans will marry perfectly. And once we've given those a stir in that very flavorful fat, we'll go ahead and add a couple of tablespoons of water, and we will stir that in. And if there's any caramelized bacony goodness on the bottom of the pan, that's going to be dissolved off. And then once our cooking liquids start to simmer, we'll go ahead and take a masher, and we will mash these beans as smooth as we want, which for me is going to be pretty smooth. But I do want a little bit of texture, so I'm definitely not going for a perfectly smooth puree. So I kept mixing and mashing, smushing and smashing until I had something that looked like this. And that's it. I went ahead and grabbed a spoon, not just to check the final texture, but also, of course, to taste for seasoning, since beans generally need a good amount of salt. So make sure you're tasting and adjusting. And that's it. Once it's looking, feeling, and tasting exactly how we want, that's now ready to spread over our toast, either immediately or after we let it cool down a little bit, which is what I did. Oh, and this would be the perfect time to mention that even though I'm only making 2 here, in the recipe, the beans and greens components are going to be enough to make 4 of these tartines. So what you see me spreading over each toast here is 1/4 of our mixture, which I thought was a perfect amount. And sure, if you wanted to add more liquid to these beans for something a little softer, that would be fine. But I figured with the moisture from my greens, plus we're going to top this with melted cheese, I decided to keep this bacony bean spread pretty thick. And then once our toast has been spread with beans, we will go ahead and grab our greens. And again, we'll top each one with 1/4 of the amount. And then once we have those greens arranged on top of our beans, it is time to bake in our tartines. So over the top of each one, we will evenly distribute 1/4 of our crispy cooked bacon, followed by a small amount of a hugely important ingredient. And that would be squeezing about a teaspoon of lemon juice over the top of each one of these. And besides flavor, that little bit of acidity is really going to wake these up and provide an important balance to the olive oil in the bread and that cheese on top, which after the lemoning is the last and final step. And I'm going to be covering mine with some grated pepper jack, although regular jack would be absolutely fine, as would a cheddar or any other melty cheese, really. And I really don't care what you use, as long as you grate it yourself. All right, if you're looking for an easy-to-keep New Year's resolution, how about no pre-grated cheese this year? Since it is just not as good, not even close. But anyway, once those are cheesed, they're ready to bake, which we will do in the center of a 450-degree oven for about 12 minutes, or until our cheese has started to brown and everything's heated through. And they hopefully look like this. Oh yeah, those look very, very eatable. And if everything's gone according to plan, the bottom should be nicely golden brown as well. And it's not mandatory, but I do like to let these cool for about 5 minutes before serving. Since these look so appetizing, people will bite right in even though they're piping hot. And it's been my experience that people will remember being burned way longer than they'll remember a good meal. So be careful and maybe let these rest a couple minutes before you serve them up, which I'm going to do garnish with some sliced Fresno chilies, as well as some freshly sliced green onions, mostly because I thought it would look nice for the contractually obligated pictures, but it tastes good too. So I snapped a few of those, and then I grabbed a knife and cut in, and then I went in for a bite, which really was tremendous. All right, beans and greens in general have a proven track record for being very delicious together, but when they're bacony, kind of refried beans, paired with garlicky greens with that little hint of lemon, and you serve that on warm, crunchy olive oil-soaked toast, topped with a generous amount of melted cheese, you're talking about something very special indeed. And at this point, you're probably thinking, that all looks and sounds great, but how the heck does this provide good luck in the new year? Well, that is because of the very old, but I think very true culinary superstition that if you eat beans and greens at the beginning of a new year, that will guarantee good fortune and prosperity. Right? The greens are supposed to represent paper money, and the beans represent coins. I know they really don't look like coins, but just go with it. And no, contrary to popular belief, you don't have to eat this on New Year's Day for it to work. All right, I've consulted many wise men and women, not to mention a guru or two, as well as a shaman and a few shaman. And they all agreed, if you eat beans and greens in the first week of the year, you still get all the good fortune benefits. So you got that going for you, which is nice. But besides the good luck thing, there are other reasons why the timing for this is perfect. And that has to do with the New Year's resolutions for eating healthier You know, less meat, more fiber, more dark leafy greens. Okay, so if you've pledged to maybe eat a little bit better this year, having one of these instead of that double cheeseburger is not a bad idea. Plus, as far as your personal tastes go, there are like hundreds of different ways you could adapt this. But no matter what you add or delete, or whether you're going to eat this for good fortune, or because of some New Year's resolution that you'd like to keep for more than a couple weeks, in any event, this was very easy and absolutely delicious, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.